Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1045, 1045, Sunday, February 16th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Alrighty, today I really want to focus almost entirely on the New York Times article, but just a couple quick things here before we get to that. Don't forget to get your vote in for Dumbass of the Week in the comments section of this video, preferably before 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Dumbass of the Week. Now, yesterday, just a couple headlines here. Yesterday there was a headline about possibly that Mike Bloomberg is looking to maybe have the Rotten Reverend as his VP. Well, yeah, I'm trying to think about what Hillary thought about that. She's probably thinking, me be his VP? I don't think so. He might be my VP. I have a rough time seeing the Rotten Reverend Clinton accepting a VP position under Bloomberg. I don't really see that. And I don't really think that that's what's going on here or anything else. I mean, I think that this is probably was a trial balloon to get Bloomberg and Hillary's get both their names out there and begin floating this, because the Democrats realize they're likely going to have a brokered convention. They're likely going to be facing a Bernie showdown. Bernie is likely going to be the top guy at the end. He'll have probably the most delegates. He won't have enough to clinch and capture the nomination, but he will have enough that he will be the top tier candidate. And of course, they have to stop him. And so it looks like to me that they feel their two best options at a brokered convention is that they have Bloomberg, and maybe he can defeat Bernie before the convention, and if not, they have the Rotten Reverend Clinton, who they can write in nomination. And so this gives them two different paths to follow. And by putting both their names out there, they can kind of do take the temperature of the Democrat voters and see whether or not either of these two candidates sicken them so much that they simply won't be able to support them. So I think that that's what this was about. They wanted to get Bloomberg and Hillary's names out there just as kind of a test to see how people respond to the idea of a Bloomberg or a Rotten Reverend Clinton. I don't think that they're seriously considering that there would be a Rotten Reverend Clinton VP on the ticket with Bloomberg. I don't think anyone believes that the Rotten Reverend Clinton would even accept a VP slot under Bloomberg. If anything, she would want the top spot and have Bloomberg be her vice president. I think that's the way the Rotten Reverend Clinton would see it. I don't think she sees Bloomberg as being a bigger, I don't think she sees him as the top of the ticket. Now, as the primaries go on, if all his money is able to buy him the support of all the anti-Bernie Democrats, all the Democrats who don't like Bernie, if he can consolidate all them, then maybe there's something there. And I do believe that, Biden, I mean, they can keep him in the race. I mean, they just got to keep giving him money. They can keep Klobuchar in the race. They just got to keep giving her money. Now, my guess is if they want to go with Bloomberg, then they'll try to get these other people out so that they can get it down to a Bernie versus Bloomberg, and hope that Bloomberg can pull together enough delegates that he can seal the deal and head off a brokered convention. But, I don't know what they'll have to offer people like Klobuchar and Buttigieg and others to walk away, but Bloomberg's got a lot of money, and he could probably buy every one of them off. He could probably walk up to Buttigieg or Klobuchar and say, here's, $100,000, walk away. $200,000, walk away. $1 million, walk away. I mean, it's really hard to say, but it just seems I'm just having a rough time believing that the majority of Democrats are going to allow someone to come into the party, a Republican to come into the party and literally buy the nomination. I don't know that that's going to fly. Maybe, but I don't think so. I think Bernie is going to be the guy with the most delegates when they get to the convention, but he's not going to have enough, and I believe that's where it's going to end up. And then I believe at that point they'll likely try to write in the Rotten Reverend Clinton, or maybe they'll put their support behind Bloomberg, Maybe there's someone else. I don't know. But it's just how it's shaping up right now. But I do think that just dropping this story yesterday was simply a way to take the temperature of Democrats and see how they would respond to a rotten Reverend Clinton or a Bloomberg. And I think that that's what that was designed to do. Yeah, and there was another thing yesterday. There was a pic that showed up. I saw it on Gateway Pundit. A pic of Peter's been stroking us. Yes, Peter's been stroking us sitting in a diner having lunch with that hack from CNN, Rick Wilson. And of course, Rick Wilson, I mean, he's a hardcore anti-Trumper. This guy, he don't just hate Trump. He hates Trump supporters. And he literally openly says these sorts of things on CNN. He bashes Trump, but he bashes Trump supporters and blames Trump supporters probably more than any media hack that I see out there, particularly on CNN. So here's Rick Wilson in a diner talking with Peter's been stroking us. What do you think they were talking about? Okay, so let's get to this New York Times story. Now, this New York Times story broke on Friday morning, and it was almost identical to the story they did a little less than 3 weeks ago. So this is the second sort of almost identical type story coming out of the New York Times 2 times in 3 weeks. Both times right at the end of the week. This one came out on Friday. And, of course, this story was designed to do exactly what the last story was designed to do, which is to attack Durham, Barr, and Trump, making that same argument, trying to get this narrative going that Trump and Barr are going after Trump's political enemies and using Mr. Durham to do it. And they also want to go into it a little deeper and suggest that Durham is digging into the CIA, questioning their motives, questioning their activities, particularly during 2016, maybe even before that, and how, Durham shouldn't be doing that, that the CIA is somehow above reproach, and that going back and trying to look at what the CIA was doing back in 2016 is somehow taboo, that Durham shouldn't be doing it, and they're only doing it to get back at Trump's enemies, specifically targeting Brennan and this sort of thing. And of course, then you get Brennan showing up on TV to answer to these charges. So this is all very coordinated. It's another coordinated rollout. And the idea of that story was so to roll it out on a Friday so that all the Sunday morning talk shows would be focused on this as one of the main topics, how Trump, Barr, and Durham are, going after Trump's political enemies, going after the CIA, and then, of course, you know how they'll paint that. So that was what was supposed to happen for the narrative for this weekend. But then what happens is Barr comes out, does that interview, and then says, that that Trump is making his job very difficult, nearly impossible, by tweeting out about ongoing cases and judges and things like that. And then the narrative completely flipped. So the narrative they wanted in the morning had to be completely flipped in the afternoon, because now you had Barr come out and make that statement. So now by the afternoon, instead of, Trump and Barr and Durham are working to, take out Trump's political enemies, the narrative had been forced by Barr to be shifted to, the president and Barr are now at odds. Will Trump fire Barr? Will Barr resign? All these sorts of things. So the very narrative that they whipped up in that New York Times article in the morning on Friday was dead by the afternoon because of Barr's comments. So you have to wonder if that was Barr playing a little bit of 4D chess, because Barr cares a lot more about shutting down that narrative than he does about making a comment about Trump's tweets. So it may have been a little 4D chess by Barr, or maybe just good timing on his part. But either way, that narrative that the New York Times was trying to push with this story pretty well got derailed by Barr on Friday afternoon. So I think that's kind of funny to point out. But as was the case with the previous New York Times article, while it was the goal of it was to paint Barr, Trump, and Durham in a bad light, going after political enemies, and this whole 9 yards, while trying to pretend that the CIA, the FBI, are above reproach, are above being questioned. You can't question the motives and activities of these people. They're higher than thou, sort of thing. This is kind of what both of the New York Times articles were trying to do. But in both cases, in both these New York Times stories, they also expose quite a few things that we did not know. And this particular time, one specific thing that I picked up on very much, obviously, that I picked on that was exposed, I think is a game changer. And at least to me personally. Because as you know, I strongly believe the Rotten Reverend Clinton had a lot more to do with this plot than what she's being given credit for by most pundits. Most people focused on the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, foreign governments, when I've been saying for a very long time, I think the Rotten Reverend Clinton was really the architect of this entire coup plot. So there's something that we learn in this New York Times article that's unbelievable, quite honestly. But it is finally gives us a true, because I've been looking for a very long time. Obviously, there's lots of circumstantial evidence of the Rotten Reverend Clinton being deeply involved in this. What we haven't really had up at this time, prior to the New York Times article, is an actual fact that would show that the Rotten Reverend Clinton was, in fact, in some way in cahoots with the FBI or the State Department or the CIA. We know that she was pumping her people into these places, and she had a lawyer, Sussman, bringing James Baker information. She had her two henchmen, Cody Shearer and Blumenthal, bringing their information into the State Department. She had Jonathan Weiner passing stuff to the State Department and also to Christopher Steele. She had her boy Christopher Steele pumping stuff through the DOJ directly into the FBI, into Confusion GPS, who was then using Nellie Orr and Bruce Orr to pump it into the DOJ. So all these things are flowing out of the Clinton orbit, that direction. But we finally have another piece of evidence that shows that was going both ways, which would show clear coordination. And we even have Christopher Steele admitting that Hillary Clinton was being briefed on everything he was doing. So let's go ahead and go through some of the things that are going on in this New York Times piece. And one of the overarching arguments that they make in this New York Times piece, in their focus on John Durham, is that he's really looking hard at John Brennan. And what Durham is apparently finding is that there was quite a few examples from people he's interviewed where they felt like certain information that they wanted to have access to was being kept from them. That it appears that Brennan was playing a little game of like hide and seek with information. He was going above and outside the normal apparatus of intelligence, where you'd go through the agencies, funnel this stuff into the NSC, it would be vetted, it would make its way into a presidential daily briefing. Brennan was leapfrogging all that, going over and around all the normal channels and going directly to Obama with these FYI, envelopes he would give Obama, or a phone call or a meeting or whatever. And he was keeping a lot of information away. And this has led Durham to believe that Brennan was intentionally hiding information, selectively pushing information to certain people among the political class, Harry Reid and people like that, but at the same time he was hiding information from the other intelligence agencies that would have looked at the stuff that he was pushing and would have said, no, we've debunked this is not good stuff. So this appears to be one of the major things that Durham has stumbled onto, is that there appears to be an effort by Brennan to play hide and seek with the information and to manipulate the way that this intelligence was being distributed between the political class, the administration, and of course the FBI. So that's where the story focuses a lot on. Now let's get to some specific things. So Durham is drilling down on the two specific things that he's been really drilling down on, is the Joint Analysis Report, the JAR, and the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment. And the reason is because these are the two critical constructs of the Russian narrative. They were created to justify all that followed, including the Mueller witch hunt and the coup. So if the Russiagate narrative collapses, the whole house of cards comes down, which is why a lot of this was done by the deep state, specifically Brennan, was to protect their narrative, because they know when that narrative is blown up, everything else that they did falls apart. And Durham knows that, and that's why he's going right at it. And of course, he knows that Brennan lied about the so-called Steele information, the dossier information, which they refer to as the Crown information. Brennan testified that information wasn't used in the ICA or the JAR, when in fact we know that it was. And that's probably one of the things that sent up the red flags to Durham. Why did Brennan lie? And so he's been interviewing people who worked on all of that in the intelligence community to find out exactly what they knew and didn't know, what they saw and didn't see, and that's where he's learning that some of these intelligence people are saying, hey, we weren't very happy about the fact that we were trying to do this analysis, but we were asking for certain things and we were told, you can't see that stuff. But yet they wanted them to make this assessment. So this is the two things that really got Durham to drill down into Mr. Potato Head and this seemingly playing hide and seek with intelligence information regarding his analysts. And of course, it's the ICA and the JAR that got Durham to this point. And again, as I just said, Durham understands that if he finds out that this whole Russiagate thing was a hoax, and Brennan knew it was a hoax and was pushing a hoax, that would explain why he was trying to protect it. Because again, Durham understands that if Brennan loses control of it and the hoax collapses, everything that they had been doing and wanted to do moving forward would not fly. The Russia hoax would go away. The entire house of cards collapses. Durham has interviewed over a half a dozen current and former officials and analysts at the NSA. The NSA. And he has repeatedly met with Mike Rogers in Connecticut. Durham has not interviewed Clapper, Brennan, and Comey. So they tell you in this New York Times story that those three haven't been interviewed. And I don't know why Durham would interview Clapper, Brennan, and Comey. I mean, they've already been interviewed. They've done multiple in front of Congress, behind closed doors. They've been interviewed. They've gone on talk shows. They've written books. They've already spoken. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious what their answers would be, and they're the guys really being investigated. And I don't think that Durham believes that they would tell him the truth anyway. I mean, do you think if you sit down with Brennan, Clapper, or Comey, they're going to tell you the truth? I don't think Durham's that stupid. He doesn't need to interview Brennan, Clapper, and Comey, and I doubt that he even will. Now, he may get to the very end when he's getting ready to indict them, sit him down with a lawyer and say, here's what we got. Our intentions are to indict you on this, 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 and this, and see if maybe they want to cut a deal. I mean, I think that might be something, but I don't think Durham would seriously go interview Comey, Clapper, or Brennan with the intention that he's going to get true, straight answers out of them. I don't think so. So let's go back to the narrative now, which again they talk about in the New York Times. They repeat the narrative over and over, even though it's pretty much been debunked. But they have the narrative, which is that Russia hacked the DNC servers in an effort to help Trump and hurt Hillary. And the investigation was to see if Trump or associates were complicit with Russia, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, or other bad actors. That is the basic narrative, that everything that was done and everything they wanted to do was writing on. Keep that in mind. That's the narrative, and this is what Durham is blown up by now. I'm sure he's blown it up. Now he's just trying to figure out why they did it, what the intentions were, who were involved in it, and how it was able to permeate itself on and on and on, lead to a Mueller witch hunt, lead to all these other things. How was that able to happen when it was so obviously debunked? That's where Durham probably is right now. So that tells you that Durham is looking at the origins, and I've asked this a couple times, do you think he's looking into the hack of the DNC server? Because that's really when the Russian narrative started. The DNC server gets so-called hacked, and the very next day we have the Clinton campaign putting out a statement that Russia hacked the DNC to help Trump. I mean, they had the narrative within 24 hours or less of the DNC hack, almost like it was planned. Durham, by now, has to be drawing serious questions in his mind about whether or not the DNC hack was actually as advertised. Was it actually the Russians that hacked the DNC and gave the stuff to WikiLeaks? At this point, if you look at where Durham is from the New York Times piece, he's sniffing all around this idea. And it appears that he's not just accepting it. So you have to wonder, is he going to question Assange? He certainly can't question Seth Rich. But there was an investigation. We know that. Judicial Watch is suing right now for those documents. Certainly Durham could probably get anything on Seth Rich that's there at the DOJ or FBI. And of course, we know that Dana Rohrabacher had a pretty lengthy conversation with Assange, and he's got some fairly good information from what we understand. We have to wonder, is Durham going to interview Rohrabacher? Maybe Durham is going to point out to the fact, or maybe uncover the fact, he's well aware of CrowdStrike. Apparently he's interviewed a couple of the people there, some of the analysts and their supervisors. He's clearly looking at the hack to see if he can verify or find out what evidence was used. And he knows it was CrowdStrike, and Durham probably understands exactly what that looks like. And so he would be very skeptical. And so we know that that's one area he's looking in, which is probably making a lot of people very nervous. We know that he's also looking at the 702 queries. We know that, of course, Mike Rogers can tell Durham, and probably has told Durham, I'm sure he's told Durham, all about those illegal 85% of 702 queries about searches were illegal. I'm sure that Mike Rogers has told Durham all about that. This also is connected to all of those unmaskings, which would have been directed by the NSC, and that would be Susan Rice and Samantha Power. So you have to assume at this point, on this same line of investigation, that Durham is going to find himself looking at the motivation for that. Why were they unmasking all these people? Who were being targeted and why? And all these other things. And this puts you into the Obama White House with the NSC, Susan Rice. Then we have, of course, the Trump Tower meeting, which is going to come up in Durham's investigation. Again, you have Glenn Simpson, an operative, and you have Veselnitskaya, an operative, who we now know was being handled by a Russian deputy attorney general named Saik Karpatyan. Now, Karpatyan was at the time a double agent, was working for the CIA. And of course, he was believed at some point to have possibly been Brennan's secret, one of Brennan's sources for information. And we know that Brennan had traveled to Russia in the summer, and it's possible they may have had a meeting. But as soon as the Trump Tower meeting begins to unravel and people start drawing questions about how that looked like another setup or frame up or what have you, about that time that the Trump Tower thing comes unraveled, this Russian Saik Karapetian ends up dying in a helicopter crash. Can't talk to him anymore. So we have some additional information now from the New York Times, other people reading the New York Times story, digging into it, extracting from that, and getting other information. And so we have some additional information This is some information who, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Roscoe Davis, but he's a former intelligence guy, knows a lot about the intelligence stuff, read through the New York Times article, and drew some other conclusions as well. So from Roscoe Davis, we get that John Brennan was running the overseas operations. I think that that's obvious. We know he traveled around Europe in 2016 using 3 different passports and aliases. And what was Brennan doing traveling around Europe with those 3 different passports and different aliases? Well, he was dropping breadcrumbs. He was flying around dropping breadcrumbs. Now, Durham's investigation into the intelligence community is sending shockwaves throughout the intelligence community, from the U.S. to London to Italy and all points in between. According to Davis, who obviously is connected to people inside the intelligence community, they are really rattled at the direction that Durham's investigation is going, and they know this because of the questions he's asking them. Also, we know that Durham has added some former high-level spooks to his team. So when he came back from Europe and he started drilling down on John Brennan and the intelligence community here in the States, apparently he brought in some really former high-level CIA analysts and people who know how the CIA works. So now he's got these high-level CIA people working with him to help unravel what was going on with Mr. Potato Head and Clapper on the intel side. As I mentioned earlier, Durham has interviewed CrowdStrike analysts and some of their supervisors, and they were working. It apparently appears that there is some sort of a connection between Clapper and these analysts at CrowdStrike. There is a Clapper-CrowdStrike connection, and I think we've gone through that before. There's a personal, obvious connection. He appears with Alperovich. He's been seen with Alperovich and these various other people. Sean, what's his name? The head guy, Sean Henry, the number 1 guy over there at CrowdStrike. So Clapper is involved. There's some people involved with CrowdStrike, analysts, supervisors who are associated with Clapper. And there appears to be a connection with Clapper and CrowdStrike, and you can assume that that's where Durham is looking. We also are learning that from what people are gathering from the questions that Durham is asking them in his investigation, that Durham believes that this was a bunch of insiders that created all of this. In other words, I think he's talking about like CrowdStrike is actually kind of an insider. They weren't like a third party that came in to look at the servers and analyze them as much as they were inside players brought in to be part of building a narrative. And that's what Durham is focused on, is that a lot of this stuff was not so much things that was flowing into the Five Eyes intelligence or the intel community about Russia, Trump, and stuff from the outside, but rather was being manufactured from the inside, and then it was being deposited in the form of breadcrumbs of intel across the world through these Five Eyes intelligence countries, and then allowing that to be scooped back up, come back into an intelligence format, and then passed into the FBI so it could be used to conduct investigations. We learned that Durham is building a case for obstruction and tampering. Obstruction and tampering, and he believes there was a cover-up. So Durham believes there's a cover-up going on, and he's looking at obstruction and tampering. He's requested data from Obama's archives, and we're learning from this story also that some of these documents he was looking for, some of the key files he wants, he's being told are missing, and that's why he thinks there's a cover-up. Durham has also interviewed Uncle Bob the Executioner and members of his team. Okay, so now we get some more extractions from the New York Times story, a different take from Real Clear Investigations, where they say that there's information that FBI agents in Rome shared with Christopher Steele 1 month before the election, information that was illegal, and that Steele was paid $15,000 by the FBI to attend the meeting. This is one of the bigger bombshells in the New York Times story, is that we learn now that about a month before the Crossfire hurricane started, Steele, of course we've known about this July 5th meeting for a very long time, but what we didn't know was that the FBI paid him $15,000 to attend this meeting, and when he attended this meeting, unlike what you normally see where cops don't give informants information. They never give informants information. They shut up and let the informant give them information. They don't give information to informants. They get information. But apparently in this meeting, they're giving Christopher Steele, the FBI, is giving him all types of classified information about their investigations, including telling him all about Papadopoulos, telling him about Downer, Halper, giving Christopher Steele all this classified information, which they weren't supposed to do. And they knew at the time, when they're giving Steele this information, that he's working for Confusion GPS and the Rotten Reverend Clinton. Not only that, just to clarify this point and drill it down even harder, in that meeting, Christopher Steele actually told the FBI at that meeting that he was, in fact, working for Glenn Simpson and Confusion GPS on behalf of the Clinton campaign, and more importantly, he told them that the candidate herself, Hillary Rotten Clinton, the candidate herself, knew about his reporting and his work. Hillary Clinton was being kept informed about the information Christopher Steele was getting. So here you have the FBI. They are now giving Christopher Steele all this classified information about people around Trump to the guy that's working for Hillary, knowing good and well that this information is going to make it to Hillary. So here we have our first clear connection where the Rotten Reverend Clinton, with Christopher Steele as an intermediary, is getting and receiving information. The Clinton campaign and the FBI are passing information back and forth using Christopher Steele and Glenn Simpson. Boom. And also this, this is backed up, this idea that Steele was receiving classified information from the FBI that he was turning around and turning over to Glenn Simpson and the Clinton campaign. This is not just in the New York Times story. This is actually in Glenn Simpson's book. Glenn Simpson actually describes the meeting he has with Christopher Steele after he has this meeting in Rome with the FBI, and he comes and has a meeting with Simpson and discloses all this classified information that was given to him by Steele. Oh, man. So, Mr. Potato Head, you need to be sweating bullets because Mr. Durham has got your number. And if you're Mr. Potato Head, let me tell you this. You are going down. Let's review what we know about Mr. Potato Head. It was Brennan, Mr. Potato Head, who first reported contacts between Russian officials and persons in the Trump campaign. It was Mr. Potato Head who first referred the case to James Comey. It was Mr. Potato Head who then contacted Harry Reid to get him to call Comey and have him pressure him to open an investigation. It was Mr. Potato Head who handpicked the analyst who stitched together the dodgy intelligence community assessment and the JAR. They said that Putin and the Russians were aspiring to help Trump improve his election chances. It was Brennan, Mr. Potato Head, who at every turn was there. He got the ball rolling. He pulled all the right strings. He whipped up the hysteria, and he had the accomplices. When you look at it, just as Mr. Durham is finding now, Mr. Potato Head was a key player. And he clearly was the guy who got the ball rolling, pushed it along. He nurtured this entire thing. And we already know, we heard, that his office during 2016 was described as almost like a mini Hillary Clinton campaign office. He had so much Hillary Clinton paraphernalia. Now, the only thing we need is a clear connection between Mr. Potato Head and Hillary herself. We now have a clear connection between FBI and the Clinton campaign with Christopher Steele as the intermediary. But I'll tell you, there is someone on the intel side that was working with the Right Reverend Clinton as well. That'll be coming, I'm sure. We just have to be patient. Thanks so much for tuning in.